That water feature is a community asset now, Mr. Hale. And you are going to learn that the hard way. That was Diane Whitfield, president of the Cedar Vale Estates Homeowners Association. For 9 years running, standing on my gravel drive in white sneakers that had never seen gravel, telling me the pool I built with my own hands belonged to her. The pool sat on my land, my deed, my water line, my family. What she did not know, and never once bothered to check in all the years she fined me, was that I spent 31 years certifying public pools for the county health department. And the paper that proved the pool was mine was the same kind of paper that would one day decide whether her pool could open at all. So when she handed me that first violation, I did not argue. I filed it. What would you have done if you had spent your whole career learning exactly how a place like this falls apart? My name is Walter Hale. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a pool and aquatic facility inspector for the County Environmental Health Division, which is a long title for a man who spent most of his life on his knees beside drains with a flashlight and a clipboard, making sure nobody's child drowned because somebody cut a corner. I retired 4 years ago to the 11 acres my wife Ruth and I bought back in the 90s. A long sloping parcel at the edge of what was then ranch land and is now, by the slow creep of money, the back fence of a gated subdivision called Cedar Vale Estates. Ruth passed 2 springs ago. The pool was the last thing we built together. I want to be plain about the pool, because it is the center of all of this. It is not a resort pool. There is no waterfall and no swim-up anything. It is a rectangle of poured concrete and tile, 36 feet by 18, that I designed myself on graph paper at the kitchen table and built over 2 summers with a rented excavator and a lot of help from Ruth, who held the other end of every string line I ever pulled. It has a proper main drain rated to the right flow, a dual suction system so no single drain can ever pull hard enough to trap a child, a filtration setup I sized by hand off the gallons and the turnover rate, and a permit on file with the county that I pulled and inspected and signed off on the way I would, because I do not know how to do it any other way. I poured the deck myself. I set every tile on the water line with my own thumbs, and there's one tile near the shallow steps that sits a hair proud of the others because Ruth bumped my elbow, laughing, and I left it that way on purpose. It sits 110 feet inside my property line. I measured it. I have the survey. I have the plat. I have the original deed that traces my 11 acres back to a cattle parcel recorded in 1962, decades before Cedar Vale Estates was a line on anybody's map, when the only thing out here was sage and a windmill and the long view to the foothills that made Ruth say, the first time I drove her out, that she could die happy on a porch looking at that. My daughter Nora is 16. She came to live with me full-time after Ruth died, though she had spent every summer of her life out here anyway, and she is the reason the pool still has water in it. She swims laps in the morning before the school bus, slow and steady, 20 lengths, the way her mother taught her, breathing every 3rd stroke, her hair, a dark rope down her back when she climbs out. On the days I cannot find a good reason to get out of bed, and there have been more of those than I will admit to a stranger, that sound of her cutting the water through the open window is the reason I do. Ruth taught her to swim in that pool the first summer we filled it, standing waist-deep with her hands flat under Nora's belly, saying, "Kick! Baby, I have got you. I will not let go." And she never did. Not once, until the day her own body let go of her in a hospital 2 springs ago, and there was nothing any of us could hold on to. I tell you this now, so you understand what was at stake was never tile and concrete and a filtration pump. It was the one place left on this earth where I could still hear my wife's voice saying, "I have got you." The first letter came on a Tuesday in April. It was printed on heavy cream paper with the Cedar Vale crest at the top, and it informed me that my pool was in violation of community aesthetic and safety standards, that an unpermitted water feature on a parcel functionally integrated into the Cedar Vale viewshed required board approval, and that I was being assessed a fine of $250. I read it twice at my kitchen table. Then I did the thing I have done every working day of my life. I started a folder. I wrote the date on the tab in pencil. Manila, the cheap kind from the drugstore. I dropped the letter in and I labeled the folder, Car, Cedar Vale. And I want you to remember that folder, because that folder is the whole story. I drove down to the Cedar Vale gatehouse the next morning to clear it up, because in my experience most of these things are a misunderstanding, and a calm conversation fixes them before anybody spends money on lawyers. The gatehouse was a little stucco guard shack, with a striped arm and a hanging basket of petunias somebody watered too much. That is where I first met Diane in person. She came out of the clubhouse in a linen blazer, the color of unsalted butter, and those white sneakers. Sunglasses pushed up on her head, though the sky was a flat overcast that promised rain, and a clipboard pressed to her chest like a breastplate. She had a way of arriving in front of you that took up more room than she did. I told her my parcel was not part of her association, that I had never signed a covenant or a deed restriction or any document of any kind that bound me to Cedar Vale, that my deed predated the subdivision by 30 years. I kept my voice level. I have found that level is the one thing people like that cannot match, because they run on heat, and a level voice gives them nothing to burn. She smiled at me, the way you smile at a child who has gotten the rules wrong and does not yet know it. "Mr. Hale," she said, "everything you can see from our front gate is functionally part of our jurisdiction. That is just how community standards work. We have an aesthetic to maintain and a property value interest to protect, and your installation is visible from the 11th hole." I told her there was no golf course at Cedar Vale, that I had checked. She told me there would be. I told her that was not how anything worked, that jurisdiction came from a recorded instrument and not from a sightline, and that I would be happy to show her my deed anytime she liked. She told me to take it up with the board, that the board met the second Tuesday, and that until then the fine stood. She said the word fine the way another person might say amen. I went home and I filed my notes from that conversation. The date, the time, the butter-colored blazer, the petunias, and what she said, word for word. Because a man who waits a week to write a thing down is a man writing fiction. That was incident 1. I need to tell you about Diane, because a story like this lives or dies on whether you understand the person on the other side of the fence. Diane Whitfield was not stupid. She was incurious, which is a different and more dangerous thing. She had been president of Cedar Vale for 9 years, and in that time, she had learned that if she said a thing with enough confidence and put it on letterhead, people paid. Her husband Greg ran a development company. I did not know that yet. I would learn it. For now, all I knew was that she ran the association like a small country, and she had decided my pool was a border dispute. The second letter came 3 weeks later. The fine had doubled. The language had hardened. Now I was told that my continued non-compliance was being noted and that the board reserved the right to pursue all available remedies. 250 became 500. I wrote the running total on the inside flap of the folder in pencil. $500 in fines I'd never agreed to for a pool on land that was never theirs. Incident 2. In June, a man showed up at my gate in a polo shirt the same butter color as Diane's blazer, with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket and a clipboard of his own, and a tape measure on his belt. He clearly did not know how to use. He said he was conducting a compliance inspection of my pool on behalf of the association, and that I needed to grant him access to the equipment pad. He had practiced the word compliance. You could hear the practice in it. I came down to the gate with my coffee, and I did not open it. I asked to see his certification. He had none. I asked which agency he represented, and he said the Homeowners Association, as though that were an agency. I asked him what an anti-entrapment cover was, and what flow rate it was rated to, the kind of question a real pool inspector answers in his sleep, and he looked at me the way a dog looks at a card trick. I've spent 31 years around real inspectors and real badges, and I can tell you the difference between a county credential with a hologram, and a state seal, and a thing somebody laminated at the office supply store. I told him he could stand at the gate and look all he liked. The view was free, but he was not setting 1 foot on my equipment pad, and if he so much as touched my main drain, I would be filing a complaint with the actual county, the one that issues the real credentials and signs, the real paychecks. He got back in his car. I photographed the car, the plate, the magnetic sign on the door that did not quite line up with the paint underneath it, and him before he pulled away. Incident 3. That night, Nora asked me why the lady in the blazer kept coming around. We were doing the dishes, her washing and me drying, which was Ruth's sole arrangement, and one we had both fallen into without ever discussing it. I told her the truth, which is that some people decide what they want and then go looking for a rule to make it true, and that our job was not to get angry, because angry is loud, and loud is what they want. Our job was to write everything down and stay quiet and stay accurate. She handed me a plate and asked if writing it down would actually stop them. In my experience, I said, the people who keep the cleanest records are the ones still standing when the dust settles. She thought about that, drying her hands on the towel. "That's a really boring superpower, Dad," she said. I told her boring was the whole point. That boring is what holds up in a room with a microphone in it. She started keeping her own notes after that, in a spiral notebook with a horse on the cover she had bought in 7th grade and never used, dates and times in her careful round handwriting. The deputy's car, the fake inspector's plate, the day they taped the gate. I did not ask her to. She just did, the way her mother used to start a thing nobody asked her to start and finish it, better than anyone would have asked. That notebook would matter more than either of us guessed at the kitchen sink that night. The escalation came in steps. The way these things always do, each one a little further past the line than the last. In July, the fines were joined by a formal demand that I drain the pool entirely, citing a mosquito and standing water hazard, which is a real category in public health, and which my pool, with its running filtration and chlorination, did not remotely qualify for. I knew the regulation they were misquoting. I had enforced it for 3 decades. I wrote a single calm letter back, citing the actual code section and the actual standard, attached a photograph of my chlorine and pH log, and I did not expect it to change Diane's mind. I expected, someday, to need to show that I had tried. Incident 4. In August, they came for Nora's mornings. A notice appeared taped to my gate one Wednesday before dawn. No envelope this time, no stamp, just a sheet of that cream paper inside a plastic sleeve, and a great deal of packing tape, declaring that use of the unpermitted water feature was prohibited pending board review, and that any continued use would be treated as willful violation. I found it when I walked down for the paper. The dew still on the grass, the tape gone milky with condensation. I read it standing there in my slippers. Then I peeled it off slow, so the paper came away whole, photographed it against the gate, and again flat on the hood of my truck, with the date on my phone showing, and filed it. Then I walked back up, made my coffee, and carried it out to the deck, and I sat on the edge of the pool with my feet in the water, while my daughter finished her 20 lengths, because I will be damned before a piece of tape on my own gate, on land that was mine before that woman was born into whatever zip code made her, tells my grieving kid she cannot swim in the water. Her mother helped pour. Nora climbed out at the end and saw my face and asked what was wrong. Nothing, I told her. Keep swimming. The fine stood at $1,500 by then. None of them paid, all of them filed, each one a line in pencil on the inside flap of a manila folder. It was that same month I learned why. I was at the county clerk's office on a routine errand, pulling a certified copy of my own plat to keep a clean original in the folder, and the woman at the counter, Carol, who I had known for 20 years from my working days, when I used to come through twice a week, chasing permits, leaned across the counter and asked me quiet if I was caught up in the Cedar Vale expansion mess. I said I did not know what that was. She looked at me a second, then went into the back and came out with a public filing and slid it across the laminate to me without a word. Greg Whitfield's development company had submitted a preliminary plan to the Planning Commission for a new phase of Cedar Vale, 41 additional lots, marketed around what the cover sheet called a signature community aquatic center. I turned the pages, and there, on the third sheet, the site plan, the proposed footprint for that aquatics center, was drawn in pale blue across a parcel line, and the parcel line ran straight through the lower end of my 11 acres. I stood at that counter for a long minute with my reading glasses down on my nose. They did not want me to drain my pool because it was visible from a golf hole that did not exist. They wanted my land, the lower acres, the flat bench above the creek, because Diane's husband had already drawn 41 families, a picture of a pool he did not own the ground for. I want to be careful here, because I am telling you what I found printed in a public document, dated and stamped and filed, not what was in anyone's heart. The filing was dated, the lots were numbered, and the math was not hard to do standing at a clerk's counter with the actual paper in your hands. Greg Whitfield needed my lower bench to build the amenity that would make 41 pre-sales close, and his wife had spent 5 months trying to find me, inspect me, and tape my gate into giving it up. I asked Carol to certify 2 copies. I drove home with them on the passenger seat in a folder of their own. And I did not speed, and I did not slam the truck door, and I did not call anybody to vent, because venting is just leaking, and I needed everything I had. I filed both copies. Then I called Carol back that afternoon and asked her how a person formally requests the full planning file, the whole thing, the staff comments and the application and the title work, and she walked me through the public records request, and I filed one of those too that same week, with a check for the copying fee stapled to it. The folder was getting thick enough now to need a rubber band. The fall was quiet in the way the air goes quiet before weather. The fines kept arriving. Smaller now, almost ceremonial, $50 here for an ongoing aesthetic nonconformity, and I kept filing them. I walked my boundary with my own survey and a roll of pink flagging tape, and I remarked every pin, because a surveyor friend named Hank, retired the same year I was, told me over coffee that the first thing a developer does when he wants your land is hire somebody to argue your corners are not where you think they are. Hank was a wiry man with hands like roots and 40 years of shooting boundaries in 3 counties, and he came out on a Saturday in October with his own equipment in a beat-up case in the back of his truck. We walked the whole 11 acres, him reading the 1962 plat off a clipboard, me dragging a chain through the sage, and we found all 4 original monuments exactly where the plat said they would be. Iron pipes capped and set in concrete, one of them grown over with rabbit brush. The cap stamped with a license number from a surveyor who had been dead since the Carter administration. Hank ran his tripod over each one and shot it cold, and he stood up from the last one and said, in the flat way of a man who does not waste words, "Walter, your corners are right where God in 1962 put them. Anybody says different is selling something." He signed a fresh certificate of survey that week, sealed it, and I filed it, and I slept the whole night through for the first time in a long while the way you sleep when you have checked every door. Then in October, a sheriff's deputy came up my drive, and I want to tell you about him because he matters, and because I will not have anyone thinking this story is about bad cops. His name was Deputy Reyes. He was maybe 35, polite, and visibly uncomfortable. He told me the association had filed a complaint alleging I was operating an unpermitted and hazardous public pool, and that he was obligated to respond to a filed complaint whether or not it had merit. I told him I understood, because I did. I had spent my career on the other side of exactly that obligation. I showed him my permit, my plat, my chlorine logs, and my equipment pad. He looked at all of it the way a man looks who knows what he is seeing. Then he told me something that changed how I thought about the whole fight. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I can see this is clean, but me seeing it doesn't end it. What ends it is a record. Every time they file, you make sure there's a documented response on file with us, dated with the facts. You build a pattern. You get enough of a pattern showing they're filing false complaints. And that stops being your problem and starts being theirs." He paused at his car. "How many complaints have they filed against you?" I told him this was the 3rd one routed through his office. He nodded slowly. "Get to where you can show a pattern," he said. "Then call me directly." He left me his card. I filed it. Incident, I realized, was the wrong word for what I had been counting. What I had been building, without quite naming it, was a case. The winter was the worst of it, because winter is when the desperate get bold. Greg Whitfield's planning application had stalled at the commission, and I would later learn it stalled specifically because he could not show site control of the aquatic center parcel, which is to say, he could not show he owned my lower acres because he did not. A developer with 41 pre-sold lots and a stalled application is a man with a clock running. And so the pressure that had been administrative turned physical. In January, I came home from the grocery on a gray Thursday with a sack of food on the seat to find a contractor's truck parked at my lower gate and 2 men with bolt cutters working on my chain. Nora had called me before I even saw the truck, her voice coming through the phone in pieces, the way a voice does when fear gets ahead of the sentence. "Dad, there's men. They're at the lower gate. They're cutting something." I don't. What do I? I kept my own voice flat, for her sake, because a scared kid needs one calm voice in her ear more than she needs to hear that you are scared too. I told her to go inside, lock the door, do not come down, and start recording from the upstairs window. Get the truck. Get the men. Get the gate. Do not stop recording. And to my everlasting pride, that is exactly what she did, steady as anything, a 16-year-old with a phone held in 2 hands against a window screen. I called Deputy Reyes on the direct line from the cab while I drove, Told him I had men with bolt cutters on my deeded land and a development company's logo on the truck door, and he said 2 words, "On my way," and hung up. By the time I got there, the chain was already cut, lying in the gravel in 2 bright pieces, and the 2 men were standing on my side of the gate with a printed work order, looking like men who had been told this was routine and were starting to suspect it was not. Diane was there too, in a parka with a fur-trimmed hood that cost more than the truck they came in, directing the whole thing with 1 finger, like a woman conducting an orchestra of people who could not hear her. When she saw my truck, she did not flinch. She did not even lower the finger. "This is association land now, Walter," she said. "The board voted. You can read the minutes. We are exercising our easement. There was no easement. There had never been an easement, not in my deed, not in their plat, not anywhere in the recorded record I had pulled with my own hands at Carol's counter. Yet she said it the way she said everything, with the total confidence of a woman who had not in 9 years been told no by anyone who could make the no stick. I got out slow. I did not raise my voice, and I did not go near the men. I asked the older of the 2, the one with the gray in his mustache, and a real contractor's plate on the truck, a single question. I asked him whether he had personally verified with a survey that this gate stood on association property before he put bolt cutters to a private citizen's chain. And I watched that man's face go from annoyed to gray, because he had a contractor's license to protect and a family to feed on it, and he had just understood, standing in my gravel, that the woman in the fur hood had handed him a work order and never once handed him a survey. He set the bolt cutters down on the tailgate very carefully, the way you set down a thing you wish you had never picked up. That was when Deputy Reyes came up the drive with his lights turning silent against the gray sky. And the whole thing stopped being a question of who could say easement with the straightest face. He took statements. He took Nora's video. He took my deed and my plat, and the fresh survey Hank had signed in the fall. He took the cut chain into evidence. And he told Diane Whitfield, in front of the contractors and my daughter and the gray January sky, that cutting a chain on a private citizen's posted and deeded land was not an association matter. It was destruction of property and potentially criminal trespass. She told him he did not understand how community governance worked. He told her he understood criminal mischief just fine. The fines, I added up that night, stood at just under $2,000, everyone unpaid, everyone filed, alongside a deputy's report that now had my clean documentation stapled to the front of it. Diane had finally crossed the line from paperwork into a crime, and she had done it on video, on my land, in front of a sworn officer. She did not know yet that she had handed me the last page of my own folder. What happened next did not happen in a shouting match. It happened at a county planning commission hearing on a Thursday evening in March, in a fluorescent-lit room with folding chairs, and it is the part of this I will remember when I have forgotten everything else. Greg Whitfield's expansion application had come up for its public hearing. He needed the commission to approve the new phase, and to do that he needed to demonstrate site control of every parcel his plan touched, including the aquatic center site. He stood up in a good suit and presented his renderings, the blue water, the 41 happy lots, and he told the commission that site control of the final parcel was being finalized through the Homeowners Association standing easement. Diane sat in the front row in a red blazer, nodding, the picture of civic partnership. I had signed up to speak. When my turn came, I walked to the little podium with my folder. And I did not give a speech, because I had learned long ago that the document does the talking, and the man who talks over his own document is a man who does not trust it. I laid 3 things on the podium where the commission could see them. My original deed, recorded in 1962. My current survey, signed and sealed by Hank the previous fall, showing the aquatic center site sitting 110 feet inside my private boundary. And the deputy's report from January, documenting the cut chain. There is no easement, I said. There has never been an easement. This parcel has been in single private ownership since before this subdivision existed, and the only access anyone from the association has taken to it was taken with bolt cutters in January, which is documented here. I slid the survey toward the chairman. The aquatic center on this plan is drawn across my living room, gentlemen. You cannot grant site control of land that is not for sale and never was. The chairman, Okafor, who had been doing this for longer than I had been inspecting pools, put on his glasses and looked at the survey for a long time. Then he looked at the planning staff. Then he looked at Greg Whitfield, who had gone the same color. His contractor went in January. The room was very quiet. Somewhere, a folding chair creaked. Mr. Whitfield, the chairman said, your application represents that you have site control of the amenity parcel. This survey says the parcel is privately owned and has been since 1962. Do you have a recorded instrument that contradicts this? Greg Whitfield did not have a recorded instrument. He had a wife who had said the words, functionally part of our jurisdiction, for the better part of a year. And words are not an instrument. He stammered something about a pending agreement. Mr. Okafor took off his glasses. There is no pending agreement reflected in the title, he said. Without site control, this application cannot be deemed complete. It is denied without prejudice. He set the survey down gently, the way you set down something that belongs to someone else. And Mr. Whitfield, the commission takes representations about site control very seriously. I would have your counsel review what was filed with us. That was the whole reveal. No shouting. A survey, a deed, a report, and a quiet man with glasses reading them out loud. My folder had won the case before I ever opened it. All I did at that podium was let the commission read what had been true since 1962. Here is the pair of numbers I want you to hold, because they are the whole shape of the thing. The fines they had assessed against me totaled $1,950 across 11 months, of which I had paid exactly $0. And the loss that fell on Greg Whitfield's company in the 90 days after that hearing, between the collapsed presale deposits on 41 lots and the financing he could no longer draw, ran past $2 million. 0 against $2 million. They had counted my pennies for a year and never once added up their own exposure. The consequence did not need my help. It arrived on its own, the way water finds the low ground. With the expansion denied and his financing pulled, Greg Whitfield's company could not fund the obligations it had already taken on. And one of those obligations was the existing Cedar Vale community pool, the one inside the gates, the one Diane actually did have jurisdiction over. That pool was old. It had been coasting on deferred maintenance for years, because the money kept getting moved into the expansion. And in May, when the community pool came up for its annual operating inspection, the inspector who walked that equipment pad found a main drain that did not meet the anti-entrapment standard, a standard I happen to know by heart, because I had spent the back half of my career enforcing the federal law that created it. The community pool failed. It could not legally open for the season. 40 families who had paid Cedar Vale dues for a summer at the pool found a chain on the gate, and this time the chain was legal, and it was not mine. Which is how, on a warm afternoon in late May, Diane Whitfield came up my gravel drive for the last time. Alone, in regular clothes, no blazer, no clipboard, no sneakers that had never seen gravel. She stood at my gate, where she had stood 11 months before, and she could not look at me the same way. "Walter," she said, and her voice had none of the brass left in it. "The community pool failed inspection. The anti-entrapment thing. Nobody on the board understands it, and the company that built it is. Greg's company can't. There isn't money to fix it before summer." She stopped. "People are asking me why their kids can't swim. I know what you are. I'm asking you, please. Would you look at it? Would you tell us what it needs? Would you let the neighborhood kids use yours? Just until." She was asking me to take back the pool, in a manner of speaking. To take responsibility for the water she had spent a year trying to take from me. To bring my expertise, the very expertise she had never once bothered to check inside her gates to save her summer, the pool she had fined me for, declared a hazard, taped my gate over, sent a fake inspector and real bolt cutters to seize. She wanted it back. She wanted me to give it to her. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. Mostly I felt tired. And underneath the tired I felt my wife, because Ruth would have known exactly what to do. And standing there, I found I knew, too. I did not gloat. I did not say a single one of the things I had earned the right to say. I told Diane that I was sorry the kids could not swim, because I was. That part was true, and had nothing to do with her. I told her the anti-entrapment fix on a drain that old was not a weekend job and would cost real money, and that no, I would not be inspecting it, because a man does not inspect a facility he has a documented dispute with, and she of all people had made sure that dispute was very well documented. And then I told her the only thing that mattered. The kids can swim here, I said, not because the board votes on it, because I'm saying they can. Send the families to me directly, one at a time, and Nora and I will set a schedule, free. That has nothing to do with you or your gate." She started to cry, which I had not expected and did not enjoy. I did not comfort her, and I did not twist the knife. I just let the gate stand between us, the way it always should have. And after a while, she nodded and went back down my drive. And that was the last time Diane Whitfield ever set foot on my land. Nora was on the back step when I came up from the gate. She had heard most of it through the open window, the way she heard everything. "You're really going to let them swim here?" she said. It was not quite a question. I told her her mother would have had the gate open before the woman finished talking, and that the only thing worse than people who keep no records is people who keep records and forget what they were for. She thought about that. Then she said, "Mom would have made her say please first, though," and I laughed. The first real laugh in a long time, because Ruth absolutely would have. That summer, the neighborhood kids learned to swim in the water my wife helped pour. They came 1 and 2 at a time with their parents, on a schedule. Nora kept in her spiral notebook, the same notebook she had started, keeping the night a man with a fake badge came to our gate. The fines were never paid, and never will be, because they were never owed. Greg Whitfield's company filed for protection in the fall. Diane resigned the presidency in October, 9 years after she took it, and the new board's first act was to write down formally, in minutes I have a copy of, that the Hale parcel was not and never had been part of Cedarvale Estates. I filed those minutes. Of course I filed them. The folder is closed now, but I kept it. Here is the practical lesson, and I am going to give it to you plainly, because you stayed this long. If you own your land, get your deed and read it, the actual recorded one, not the summary the title company sends. Walk your boundary and find your pins. If you cannot find them, Pay a licensed surveyor to set them and keep the signed certificate. When a letter comes that you believe is wrong, do not argue and do not pay. File it with the date and write a calm, factual response, citing the actual rule, and keep a copy. When someone with a clipboard tells you a thing is functionally theirs, ask them for the recorded instrument, because there almost never is one. And keep one folder, a cheap manila folder, and put everything in it, every letter and every photo and every report. Because the day will come when a quiet room full of people who can actually decide things will want to see exactly what happened. And on that day, the person with the folder wins. Not the person who shouted the loudest, the person who wrote it all down. If you have got a story like this, an HOA or a code office or a clipboard that decided your land was theirs, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of people who are in the middle of their own fight right now and need to know how it ends. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one, because there is always a next one. Next time I'm going to tell you about the retired land surveyor whose HOA repainted the lines in a shared parking lot to steal 4 feet of his frontage, and what happened when he pulled out the original 1971 site plan at the county counter. Until then, walk your boundary, keep your folder, and find your pins.